It's The Journey with drug and alcohol attorney Mark G. Astor.
All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of The Journey from addiction to recovery. Very excited to have as our special guest today, Angelo Lagares. Angelo is the founder and director of Latino Recovery Advocates, LARA. Did I pronounce that right, Angelo?
Yeah.
Which is a non-profit organization that promotes recovery services in Spanish and advocates to change policies in an effort to promote cultural competency and provide culturally appropriate services. LARA's mission is to create recovery community organizations in Spanish that will ultimately reduce health disparities among the Hispanic communities. In May 2019, Angelo met with Congress in Washington, D.C. and spoke to senators regarding the importance of reducing health disparities and to improve the quality of services to Latinos. Angelo was also chosen as one of 12 storytellers featured in the powerful Stop Opioid Silence campaign, supported by the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids and Facebook. Angelo was the only Spanish speaker on the panel, and his story was viewed and shared thousands of times. The SOS campaign received over 50 million shares and impressions in its first week, positioning Angelo as a vital, dynamic, influential voice in the recovery and Latino community. Angelo's hands-on approach is powerful and effective, and he has built a network of Latino advocates who, just like himself, are passionate about translating recovery for communities in Latin America and the United States. Wow, that's pretty impressive. And I know that we were connected by our mutual friend, Andrew Berkey, who spoke very highly of you. So that means you must be doing some incredible work.
Thank you.
And so I'm glad that you were able to come in, and you're like our Christmas gift, right? Or a Christmas guest gift, I should say. So thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So let's step back a little in time, because I know you've got your own story, and I want to talk about LARA because that's sort of the main reason you came here. But your own story's somewhat interesting, right? You have a real thick, I guess this is a Dominican accent.
Yes.
And you told me you shared a little bit of your own personal story before we went on air. So tell us a little about your own background, how you came to be a recovery advocate, your own journey into recovery, and and what it was like growing up. Because I know you spent some time in New York and the Dominican, right?
Yes. Thank you for having me. Basically, my name is Angelo Lagares. I'm a person in long-term recovery since March 22, 2005, and what that means for me that I'm not, what that does for me that I'm not in jail dead. Like in this process, I became responsible for my community. Became a father, son, and my story, I was born in New York and raised in the Dominican Republic. And when I was like 14, 15, I started experimenting with substance. In those days, it was like a progression. You experimenting with alcohol, some marijuana. But I had like issues before that I used, any drugs. A lot of anxiety. I was like, since the beginning, since a real kid, since when I was 5, 6 years old, I have like all this feeling, not feeling accepted, and then when I was 16, 17, I started to experiment with marijuana, alcohol, and other drugs, and then I used to go back and forth to visit my mother in New York, and then everything started. I was telling you earlier that I witnessed, the crack epidemic in those days, 1985.
Right, and I want to get to that because that's really a really interesting story too. But you told me something interesting about your mom. Your mom was a doctor, right? She worked in a lab.
She worked in
40 years, the same job.
Bioanalysis in the Lincoln Hospital for 40 years in the same office.
Wow. So that was in New York. Was your dad in the picture at all?
My dad wasn't in the picture, but he was there in New York too. But my mother always was, trying to, it was supportive with me, like, 100%. Even that I was in Dominican, probably raised my grandparents, she always was there, providing, and team with my uncles, and my whole family trying to give me the best,
Why did you go from New York to the Dominican?
Because my mother was in school, she was working, and then she thought it was better if she sent me to my grandmother's house.
Okay, do you have any siblings?
No, I'm the only son.
Okay, so she was basically raising you as a single mom.
Yes.
Not easy to do.
Yes, nothing easy to do in New York in those days by herself. And then I grew up with my loving grandfathers and my uncles, and I think I had I had like a lot of role models in my life, like my uncle was going to medical school, like all these, but I always something in me that I like, the other side, like drinking and I was a conflict kid.
What was it like growing up in the Dominican? I mean, were there lots of drugs? Was there access to drugs?
It was beautiful. In those days, you don't have like a lot of access to drugs back in the 80s. But it's the Caribbean, and I was raised, with all these values and that. But I looked for that. I started experimenting with marijuana, and then I went to New York and got a lot of access to drugs.
When did you go back to New York?
1985. I always was in New York. All the summers, 2 or 3 times a year, I traveled to New York when I was a kid. But in 1985, when I was like 17, 18. Was the moment that that I was, I'm Dominican, and Dominican in those days control, all the drugs in Manhattan and Washington Heights. It was easy for me, all the access, enabling for all these people that knew me. They think, they protect me, the people from the streets and everything, and I got a lot of access to the drugs there.
Yeah, you shared something that I thought was really interesting, which was that around that time was when there was sort of the crack epidemic that was going on.
Yes, it's something really important because we talk about a lot the opiate epidemic now, it's something
like
new.
It's something brand new, right? It just happened a couple years ago.
We've been in a public health crisis in this country for the last 100 years. You talked about the 70s, the epidemic then. They affected, African American communities back in the 70s, the 50s, the 40s. We've been in a public health epidemic the last 100 years. And then when you compare the crisis of the crack epidemic to now, like in those days, you didn't get no treatment. It was mass incarceration. People of color suffer. It hit most community of colors, Latino and African American back in the 80s, and was a violent crisis. That epidemic was really insane, the crack epidemic, and affect whole communities. In those days, wasn't advocacy, wasn't resources for like now. Now the opiate epidemic now. Wake up all this advocacy movement and all these resources, and everything changed. Everything, all the system is questioned because the opiate epidemic affect, white middle class kids.
You think that was what the big change was when it shifted into sort of middle class America?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. And and it's all good because something triggered, that. Wake up. It's like waking up to all this epidemic. But we have to go to history. We have to understand history because all the new kids sometimes, in the advocacy movement, they think this is everything. Oh, the opiate epidemic. No, this is an addiction epidemic. We're talking about alcohol and the race, benzodiazepine, everything. We gotta treat everything, and we gotta treat all communities.
We get a lot of calls, Angelo, not just on addiction to drugs, right? We get calls on eating disorder cases. We're now getting calls on people who are addicted to these things. I mean, and they are addicting, right? I mean, so it seems like we go from one type of addiction to another. So, I mean, this shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. I mean, we had alcohol back in the, before Prohibition, and then it shifted, to harder drugs. And I think even back then, during Prohibition, they had people were using opioids, right? I mean,
yes,
this isn't something new.
The crisis in 1900s of the codeine and opiates. Bill White, the great Bill White, really supporter. Bill White is really supportive of LARA and cultural change.
Who's Bill White?
Bill White is one of the historian. He's one of the greatest advocacy in addiction. Bill White, you gotta see Bill White's website. He's one of the greatest advocates, and he got all the history here in his blog. And when you go there, you're gonna see the timeline. Thanks for Bill White. We got all this information. Okay, you can go to Bill White papers. A couple of years ago, we wrote something about the inclusion in the community for the Latino community and the recovery community, and he posted in his blog, and he's really supportive about diversity and inclusion in this movement. It's something that health disparities has been affecting people of color for the longest, and now that we got all this information, we have to understand history. We have to understand what was the war on drugs. It was a tragedy. It was this tragedy to create all this discrimination of people of color back in the 20s, back in the 40s, back in the 50s. Like what people of color have in those days: mass incarceration, discrimination. Now, like we talk, the last 7-8 years affecting the people, middle class white kids, like George's son, doctor's sons. Now everything is happening. The whole system is questioned.
Right.
If you see all the things that happened in the last 7 years in advocacy, and that's great, but we have to create a culture of more inclusion. That's what I'm saying?
Yeah. So let me ask you a question, and I want to talk about the whole inclusion thing in LARA and how that came to be, but share a little bit about your own journey, because I know that you said you went through quite a long time of addiction.
I was that person that went 40 times to treatment. In those days, I went to treatment in the Dominican Republic. In those days in Latin America, and they still use in Latin America the therapeutic community. And that means that I was in treatment a year and a half. I was in treatment 2 years. I was in and out of treatment, and I couldn't get this. Imagine 40 times to treatment.
Why do you think that was?
Because I didn't have, because I wasn't ready in one point, but another point I didn't have the treatment that I needed. I didn't have the support that I needed. The recovery capital. I didn't have the recovery capital. I didn't have all the support, because in Dominican Republic, we don't have, in those days, you don't have 12 steps back in the 90s. And then when I came here, therapeutic community, all this system didn't help me, but I was consistent. I was consistent. I was I was in the methadone clinic. I was in psych unit. I think I went through all that to be in this point. Now I see it like this. I think I went through all the situation that I went to have the understanding to be able to help people now.
So how long have you been in recovery now?
Now I've been in recovery 14 years and 9 months.
That's amazing. Good for you, my friend.
And for me, that's insane, because I always was hungry for recovery, but at the end, I continued to pick up, I continued to use, and I use everything. I was like a methadone, heroin, pills, benzodiazepine, alcohol. My drug of choice was more, and for me, it's incredible, this new life, this new life of caring for my community. I was selfish. I was in destruction of the community back in those days in New York, selling drugs. I was in all that insanity.
Did you ever get caught selling drugs?
I was so lucky in my life, I
think we're good, by the way. I think the statute of limitations has probably run, so it's okay to talk about this stuff.
No. I talk open about my recovery and my story. I don't have no problem with that. And I was misdemeanor. I have 10 misdemeanors, but I was in a short period of time, because for a long time I didn't get caught. I was so lucky. But at the end, I have a couple of misdemeanors for stupid. I was doing 3-4 days in Central Booking in New York. I went to Rikers Island for a couple of days. They built Rikers Island, but it was something funny, because I was in treatment, and one point in 2001, when I made the decision to go back to treatment, the Warren Squad came to get me in treatment. And they said, you can run or you can go, because you got 5 open cases, small cases, but I was running. I got 5 warrants, and I went back, and they hit me, for a couple of. I did 3 days in Rikers Island, and then they sent me back to treatment, mandated to treatment for 18 months, and that will start my journey,
So what do you think it was? What was the catalyst for you to finally not just find recovery but maintain it? Something happened, right? That must have just, where the light bulb went off, you got over the hump.
I think.
What was it?
I think what helped me was all the prior concept, all the time that I was in treatment, and then I surrendered. I was okay, what I have to do now? For me, for what worked for me, because everybody's different. What's going to work for me is not going to work for you. But what worked for me was like, going to treatment. I went to Seafield the last time, Seafield in West Hampton Beach. I went to detox in New York, and this is something really important to talk about. When I relapsed after 4 years. From 2001 to 2004, I relapsed with cocaine, okay? And I was smoking crack. And when I went to treatment, cocaine is not a criteria for people. That's insane, okay? Cocaine is a criteria to people go to treatment. And I had to go outside in New York after detox, drink alcohol, and come back so they can accept me.
I always thought that, it's considered sort of, wasn't cocaine sort of the drug of the 80s? You think Miami Vice and all the cocaine that was literally flooding into South Florida and funding a lot of the buildings and stuff downtown Miami. I mean, is that, back then, even now, when you were in recovery, was it still a popular drug?
Yes, always is a popular drug. Back in the, when I reached in 2004, it was a lot of access to cocaine in New York. Okay, and still, it's a lot of cocaine out there. But what I'm trying to tell you that it's so insane, the system. This system is really the public health system concerning addiction and behavioral health. Everything have to change. Like the insurance company, how cocaine is not going to be a criteria if people die in smoking crack. You know what I'm saying? What's the difference between the opiates and the cocaine? But that's the way that they do it. What I did was I had drinks, and I went back, and they accept me in the detox. And then I went to my journey. I went to Seafield for 28 days. And then, I came here when 9 months. I have 9 months when I went.
So when did you come to Florida?
I came to Florida 14 years ago.
Okay.
I have 9 months clean. I came to my friend, Abe, and my childhood friend. He said, come here, maybe this is going to be good for you. And I came here, I was in my mother's apartment in Midtown, New York. And for the first time in my life, I was like, Florida was different from it. It was really hard to adapt from New York to Florida, but it was like the community.
Where in Florida did you come to? Did you come to Miami?
I came to Palm Beach.
Okay.
And it was like the community of recovery, the capital of recovery, they used to call. It was like so much meeting and so much, advocacy work and everything.
Why do you think that was, Angelo? I mean,
because there was a lot of treatment centers here back in those days.
Because when I first started doing this work about 5 years ago, but this is before the task force, came along here in Palm Beach County and started arresting people. Thank goodness. They used to talk about Florida's recovery, capital of certainly of America, right? And the concept was, come to Florida, sit on the beach, and get well, right?
Yeah.
Don't sit and freeze your rear end off in wherever.
That was one reason that people used to go to Florida, the weather, and was so much treatment here in that labor in those days, so much, Hazleton, Caron, it was a lot of treatment here in those days, since the early 90s, since the late 90s, developing a lot of treatment in South Florida, and was a lot of bad situations. It was a lot of bad people, but it was a lot of good people too. A lot of people find recovery here. It was a lot of good people too. It was a lot of bad people, like the halfway house situation and all the treatment center, the scam and everything. But a lot of people find recovery here too. Like that was my case. You got like all these meetings, all the environments of recovery. And thank God, the task force and the new advocacy movement, like everything is changing,
So tell us about LARA, because obviously at some point you realize your mission was to help people, especially in the Latino community. So let's talk about that, how that came to be.
Yeah, in those days I was working in treatment, in a private treatment here in South Florida, but they used to have a line, 800 numbers. When people used to call there, it was like a Sansa database, right? When people called there with no insurance, with no money, they used to send it to me. I have this little office called Resources, the Resources Department of the Watershed Treatment. The watershed is no longer, they closed a few months ago. But they have like this Resources Department that used to help people with no insurance, with nothing. And I have the opportunity to talk to people all over the country. And when talking to people all over the country, they started sending me the Spanish call. People call there for help with Spanish, and I spoke with mothers, grandmothers. I spoke with wives, with people, with people in addiction, and broke my heart. Imagine the devastation of a mother with this kid smoking crack and shooting dope, and then she cannot able to communicate or find help.
Right, because nobody understands her.
She don't speak English. Maybe the kid was born here, but she don't understand the concept, the culture of recovery or the treatment process. You understand what I'm saying? And I used to start, I started, to take more and more courses in Spanish and seeing the need. Okay, I talked to people all over the country, and I used to see this is insane. And when I did all the research, I got more than 10 years doing the research. Okay, I see 57 million people in this country that speak Spanish. Okay. It's not 5 treatment with all levels of care.
There's 5 treatment centers that are really dedicated to the
it's not
Spanish-speaking
5.
community.
It's like 4. Maybe they got like a detox, or they got they got a lot of houses not licensed, like faith-based houses. They got a lot of those. Okay. All over, in Chicago, here in Palm Beach, they got like 1. But let's go here, South Florida. Like they say, the capital of recovery. It's 1 million people from Palm Beach to Miami. You cannot talk about changing policy, building new recovery community if you're going to leave half the population out. How are you going to speak about drugs and not?
Is that what the percentage is between Miami and Palm Beach? Because obviously, the further south you go, the more Latino it gets, right? I mean,
yeah, it's like 5 million Latinos in the whole state. It's like 1 million from here from Broward to Palm Beach to Miami. How are you going to talk about Miami? In Miami, you got places that don't speak English. How are you going to? Latinos contribute so much to the development of Miami or South Florida in the history. You talk about Gloria Estefan. You talk about in sports. Baseball player. In United, we contribute so much. And this is the insane part. When you talk about private company, Verizon, Comcast, AT&T, whatever, what they tell you when you call there? For Spanish, press 1. You know why? Because it's millions. You know how much?
Because speaking Spanish is good for business.
It's good for business. But why we don't treat public health for these people? Why we don't have the resources, the cultural developing resources, linguistic appropriate in treatment. And what we're going to have to do, if we're going to have to go to Tallahassee, because when you talk to the Department of Children and Families, they clueless. They don't understand. They're supposed to supervise this. Okay, let me tell you this. How about this? A person that got insurance, I'm talking about people with legal residence and citizens, okay, legal. That doesn't mean they speak English or not. That's not. They legal. They pay taxes. They work, let's see, for America. They got a good job. Mom got a good job and paying $600 and $700 for a policy, PPO. The kid go to treatment. He don't speak. The husband go to treatment. He don't speak English. And you know what they do in treatment? He's looking at the ceiling because they got like one therapist maybe that speak Spanish, but he's so busy with the caseload. What are they gonna do all day with this guy?
Right. So only one other.
They
person.
don't got a Spanish track. What we're gonna have to do is go and create laws. That's what LARA come in.
So so you started LARA? That's your baby, right?
Yes,
when did you find LARA?
I 5 years ago, I started to develop in LARA, and to change politics concerning addiction and Latinos in this country. And I started to, the mission of LARA is that any human being and family don't have the language barrier to create recovery community, RCOs in Spanish, to create information, to create, educational videos, to use, social media, to all these changes that we're living now in the recovery community, the language of addiction, everything is changing in the last 2 years, how we speak about addiction. The stigma in addiction, we're gonna break cultural barriers, with LARA, and that's I went 40 times to treatment. I'm consistent, and I'm gonna do this. Thank you to Andrew Burke. He's so supportive always,
One of the things I think we know about you is you're persistent. Once you decide you want to do something, you're going to do it, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's crazy because now LARA it's been going on for 5 years. Okay, I've been all over the place. I talk to all major organizations about they need because if you go to all the major organization advocacy and treatment and everything, they don't have websites in Spanish. They don't got a track in Spanish. And what we try to do is to bring awareness of cultural competence. That's the law. This is not something that I'm asking. It's the law. It's the human right to have treatment in your language. You understand what I'm saying? When you go to a hospital, if nobody speaks Spanish, you need to get it interpreted. You need to have track and that's why we don't have to go to Tallahassee. We have to go to change law because if I can talk all day, but when we present law and people go to jail and pay and be sued, maybe they're going to change.
So in the 5 years that you've been doing LARA, and I want to talk about the fact because I know that you've been to DC, right? Which is something that Andrew is also passionate about, and God bless him for it. So tell me what changes have you seen in the 5 years you've had LARA?
And I've been working with LARA for 5 years, developing LARA in the 5 years. But in the last 5 months, it became a non-profit because I was doing everything with my money. I was doing everything, with my family, a little money here, a little money there, with my own resources. Now, I was talking to Andrew 5 months ago and say, you got to do like a non-profit, because
I'm not going to fundraise. Who's going to support it otherwise?
Yes,
right?
because to do the things that I want to do, I need to get funding from the state, from different private organizations, because I want to develop a lot of platform in Spanish, and I'm going to do it. I'm sure that I'm going to do it. What happened was, that Facebook, Greg Williams, the director for the Anonymous People, called me one day and told me that Facebook was doing a documentary. Was the SOS the campaign, Stop Opioid Silence. That was like a year ago. And then when I tell them I'm gonna do this in Spanish, and they agree. My story, they did like 10 stories, but my story was in Spanish, and that was like something big for LARA, Like I can communicate. People have to understand, because in my culture, like in Italian culture, this is universal. A stigma is universal. What happened?
I'm gonna ask you a question here, and I apologize for interrupting you. So I sit on the board of Jewish Family Services, and we created a substance use committee. Because one of the things that we're finding was in the Orthodox Jewish community, things like addiction, right, were just something you didn't even talk about. It was kept within the family, and I'm wondering if in the Latin community, right, if that was something that was similar, right, where it was so, because I've noticed in some of the when you get new communities that come to America, right, they're very close knit. And I'm wondering if the whole idea, when you talk about stigma, if it wasn't more stigmatized perhaps in some of the Latino communities than perhaps it is, in other communities.
Listen, stigma is universal. We live in a country multicultural, like you say. Jewish came, Italian came, everybody came to America, right? And we bring, everything here, our culture, our tradition, our language. It's the same in every culture. But what's the difference between the Spanish community and other communities right now? That other community got the information in the last 5 years. Oh, let's talk about stigma. Let's talk about addiction open. Before, 10 years ago, it was like 12 steps. It was everything in recovery, and then they were so close because they say anonymity, this is an anonymous program, and people don't understand about the 12-step community is anonymous, not me. I can speak about my recovery open, and that different. But Greg Williams started the documentary, The Anonymous People. That opened a lot. People talking about, lawyers talking about addiction. This lady, Miss America, talking about addiction, like Hollywood talking about addiction open. That's something that the new recovery movement, that's the new shift of paradigm now. That we talk open, about this, and that's breaking the stigma. And now that's what I want to bring to the Latino community. Continue to break, because everything is in English. All the information that we got in the recovery movement is in English. Like now, the Voices Project. I went to when Facebook launched the documentary, they launched in the Senate, and they invited me to launch the documentary there, and I was able.
That's when you were speaking in DC in May of was it 2019?
Yeah,
Just this past year.
This past year, I got the opportunity to talk to the staff of of Marco Rubio and a few senators, and talk about LARA, and talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion, in the recovery movement. And then mobilized recovery. You can see it there too. The Voiced Project, the great Ryan Hampton, Garrett, Sean, and other staff, they got like mobilized recovery. That mobilized recovery was in Vegas in the summer. And all the advocates from the country, like 150 advocates they was invited there. And we discussed news tragedy about, advocacy and better ways and from mobilized recovery, they creating the recovery advocacy project. You have to check that. The recovery advocacy project is going to give every state, right, the tools, the technology, the understanding to we can do a more effective advocacy. And I'm part of the RAP recovery advocacy project.
So what does the future look like for LARA and the Latino community?
Like I told you before, we cannot talk about change. We cannot talk about changing public health if we don't talk about inclusion, if we don't talk about racial justice. I think we have to. I think that now in the future. We partnership with Faces and Voices of Recovery. We talking, with Patty McCarry, she's really supporter, Hernán Hernandez, to develop curriculum, to train. There's not peer support training in Spanish. It's not recovery coaching in Spanish. The state is responsible for that.
Are there any Latino interventionists?
Yes. I work in intervention. It's a few people. In the country, and I'm getting, the network to we can create, license for, like certification for peer support, certification for recovery coaching, because you need to understand the culture. If you're going to help me, as a person come to the emergency room and don't speak English and got an addiction, you have to understand the culture. Like you were saying, it's so important for the Jewish community, the Italian community. Like you have to understand cultural competence. How are you going to help me if you don't speak my language? How are you going to help me if you don't understand my culture? And this is really important to integrate and reduce health disparities. That's the mission of LARA. And we're talking next year, to create, educational videos, to do.
Are we still going to have people coming to South Florida for treatment, you think?
Yeah, I think everything's getting better. I think the system is getting better, and people because like I told you, a lot of people find recovery. It wasn't all that bad. It was a lot of bad people, and most of them are in jail now or out of business, But I think the task force and everybody's doing a good job cleaning up, all this insanity that happened. And I think, if they develop ethical, programs, and they change. People would love to come to Florida for treatment.
So I got a question. What can folks who are watching the show, what can they do to help LARA?
Well, basically, you got my email and all my information.
So let's give it out, my friend, so that whoever sees the
show. Yeah, we need to people get involved in understanding about cultural competence. We're looking for developing funding for LARA. Anything that you can help, with ideas, if you know a organization that promote recovery in Spanish, or somebody want to do like a Spanish track. If you're interested, you can contact me, and anybody can help this,
So I presume that I imagine there must be some, you're collecting funds for the non-for-profit, right?
Yes, I got the non-profit.
So is there a website for that?
Yes, I got the.
Let's give it out so people can.
Okay,
do I have it here? Let's make sure I have it. Hold on one second. Let's make sure, because we want to make sure.
We can put it.
Yeah, I'd like to give it out though. Well, here's, I'm going to give out your email address. Is that okay?
Yes.
So it's Lagares, Lagares 441 @gmail.com. And this phone number, is this a good phone number for you?
Yes, this is.
561-727-7588.
Yeah, you can find it on Facebook too, LARA, Latino Recovery Advocacy.
And I know you've got a Facebook page too, right?
Yes.
You've got your personal page.
Yes.
There's also a Facebook page. Is there a LinkedIn or any other social media platforms?
They got in the Facebook page. I got all the links there.
Okay.
You know, like Latino Recovery Advocacy page, my personal page. You know, and we're building the website right now.
Okay.
We're in the moment of building the website and everything.
I think you're going to help a lot of people.
We're gonna do that, yes, because it's gonna bring so much. You know, like when I think in that mother, desperate mother, you know, grandmother or wife, you know, that you know the guy is suffering from an addiction and can't communicate. How you gonna do an assessment? How you gonna do the intake process? You know, it's really important we can put that out there in hospital treatment. You know, be aware of that. You know, and this is addiction is universal. And we gotta find universal, you know, we gotta find like ways, you know, to help everybody.
What's what do you have on your t-shirt?
Oh,
there?
this is from the Recovery Project.
Stand Up for Recovery.
Yes, this is one of the shirts for the Voices Project.
I love it. It's a great t-shirt.
Yes.
Are you a Yankees fan?
Yes.
Jay, you a Yankees fan?
Of course.
Okay, I figured there was a connection here. I just, you know, some things I know about Jay. Listen, my friend, I appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
Thank you so much
anything
for
I can do to
having
help
me.
you, I will. Folks, if you didn't catch all the information about what we're doing, what Angelo's doing with LARA, you can certainly reach out to us, and obviously for information about what we do, drugandalcoholattorneys.com. You can email me, Mark, at drugandalcoholattorneys.com. 561-419-6095 is our phone number. We're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Vimeo. And if you can't find me there, I don't know, just Google my name, Mark G. Astor. I think you'll probably find us on the internet. Until next time, thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Angelo, for coming in, my
Thank you.
friend.